Toby sat quietly at her baby shower, surrounded by family and friends. Everyone had gathered to celebrate the coming of her child. But the moment her sister Ifeoma stood up, the air in the room shifted. With a proud smile and a sharp tone, Ifeoma began to mock Toby. She laughed loudly and said that her sister was poor, that she had nothing to offer her baby, and that she should be ashamed. The words stung, and whispers spread through the crowd. Some people lowered their heads, others stared at Toby with pity. Toby stayed calm, her hands resting gently on her growing belly, but inside, her heart ached at the cruel humiliation. Ifeoma continued, her voice louder than before, as though she enjoyed the moment. She boasted about her own wealth and lifestyle, making sure everyone heard how low her sister was compared to her. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one stopped her. Just as the silence of shame began to swallow Toby, her husband stood up with a quiet but powerful smile. He asked everyone to step outside for a surprise. Confused but curious, the guests followed him. There, right in front of them, stood a beautiful new home, shining fresh with paint, decorated with ribbons and flowers. Gasps filled the air. The house was big, strong, and ready to welcome a family. Toby's husband explained that he had been working in secret, planning this moment to give his wife and child a safe and beautiful place to live. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and smiling, while Toby's eyes filled with tears of joy. Ifeoma's proud face fell instantly. Her mocking words turned to silence. She stared at the house, unable to believe what she was seeing. The very sister she had mocked now stood before a gift greater than anything she had ever bragged about. Guests turned their attention to Toby, praising her strength and her husband's love. As Toby stepped into her new home, her heart lifted higher than ever before. The same people who had pitied her moments earlier now celebrated her. Ifeoma stood at the back, red with shame, her words swallowed by the joy of the crowd. Toby did not need to answer her sister's cruelty. The truth spoke louder than any insult. Amaka is insulted at her baby shower by her jealous sister, Halima. The gathering was filled with laughter, music, and colorful decorations, but the joy was cut short when Halima stood up with a sharp tongue. She looked around at the guests and smirked before pointing her words at Amaka. With a cruel tone, she called her sister a burden, saying she had no real husband and lived only by pity. The room fell silent, and whispers spread quickly. Some guests exchanged glances, while others lowered their heads, uncomfortable with the sudden tension. Amaka sat quietly, her face burning with shame, but she held her head high, refusing to give her sister the satisfaction of seeing her break. Halima's voice grew louder as she repeated the insult, laughing bitterly, as though her words carried victory. She bragged about her own life, pretending she was above her sister in every way. The hurt ran deep, but Amaka kept her calm, her hands gently resting on her belly, holding on to the thought that truth always comes to light. The guests shifted in their seats, uneasy with Halima's cruelty, but none of them expected what was about to happen. Just then, the sound of cars pulling up outside caught everyone's attention. The door opened, and in walked Amaka's husband, dressed neatly, his presence commanding respect. Behind him followed respected elders and members of the community. The room erupted in gasps and surprised murmurs. Amaka's husband stepped forward with a warm smile, greeting everyone before turning to his wife with love in his eyes. He placed his hand on her shoulder proudly, and then one of the elders spoke up, announcing that Amaka's husband was not only a hard-working man, but a respected doctor who had earned honor in the community. The atmosphere changed instantly. The same people who had sat in silence during Halima's insults now rose to their feet, clapping and cheering for Amaka. Her husband's kindness and the community's recognition washed away every cruel word spoken earlier. Amaka's eyes filled with tears of relief, not of pain, but of joy. Halima's face turned pale, her confidence crumbling in front of everyone. The words she had thrown so boldly now chained her in shame. Guests looked at her with disappointment, and she could not find another word to say. Amaka stood tall, surrounded by love, and in that moment, her sister's jealousy was powerless. Chidinma's sister, Ayanda, humiliates her at the baby shower, claiming she has nothing to offer her child. The hall was decorated with bright colors, filled with laughter and music, but the mood shifted the moment Ayanda stood up. With a proud smile and a sharp tongue, she pointed at her sister and told the crowd that Chidinma had no money, no home, and no future for her baby. Guests gasped quietly, some looked down in discomfort, while others turned their eyes toward Chidinma with pity. Yawanda's voice grew louder as she repeated her words, enjoying the attention, painting her sister as helpless and weak. Chidinma sat still, her hands resting on her belly, her heart heavy with the sting of her sister's insults. She did not respond right away. She knew something Yawanda did not, and in her silence she found strength. Yawanda, proud of her moment, continued to brag about her own life, boasting that she was more successful and stronger. The air grew tense, the celebration buried under layers of mockery, and for a moment, it seemed Yawanda had won. Then an elder from the family stood up and called for silence. He held a sealed envelope in his hand, and the room grew quiet. He explained that Chidinma's late father had left behind something special, something to be revealed only on this day. Gasps spread through the room as the envelope was opened and documents were pulled out. The elder announced that Chidinma had been left a massive inheritance, a large estate, land, and wealth that would secure her future and her child's life for generations. The room erupted with shock and joy. Guests cheered and clapped, turning their eyes to Chidinma with admiration instead of pity. Tears welled in her eyes as she rose slowly, her head held high. For so long, she had carried the weight of silence, and now the truth spoke louder than her sister's cruel words. Yawanda's face drained of color. The pride that once filled her eyes melted into shame. She tried to look away, but the crowd had already seen her bitterness crumble. Her words, once sharp and heavy, now held no power. The same people who had once listened to her insult now celebrated Chidinma's strength and fortune. Standing tall, Chidinma smiled, her heart full, while Yawanda stood frozen, swallowed by regret and disgrace. Zinal's sister Abiola calls her lazy at the baby shower. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and delicious food, and everyone had gathered to celebrate the new life soon to arrive. But in the middle of the joy, Abiola rose to speak. Her voice carried loudly as she looked at her sister with a mocking smile. She told the guests that Zinal was lazy, that she depended on others for everything, and that she had no ambition. Some guests shifted in their seats, uneasy with her harsh words, while others stayed silent, unsure of how to react. Zinal's cheeks warmed, but she stayed calm, her lips pressed into a quiet smile. Abiola continued, proud of the moment she had created. She boasted about her own efforts and how hard she worked, making it seem like her sister was weak and without direction. The words hung in the air, heavy with judgment, and the celebration seemed to lose its joy. Zinal, however, did not answer. She knew that sometimes silence was stronger than arguing, and she also knew something that Abiola had no idea about. A guest, curious about the delicious food on the tables, asked who had prepared it. The host quickly announced the name of a popular catering business that had been making waves in the city. Murmurs spread through the room as people praised the taste, the flavors, and the beauty of the presentation. Then, with a gentle smile, Zinal finally stood and revealed that the business belonged to her. She had started it quietly under another name, and it had grown into one of the most successful catering services in the area. The same food everyone had been enjoying that day had come from her own hands and her hard-working team. The hall erupted with gasps and then applause. Guests turned their attention to Zinal, their faces filled with admiration and respect. They praised her talent and her effort, amazed that she had achieved so much while keeping it humble. Tears of joy filled Zinal's eyes as her friends and family surrounded her with love. Abiola stood frozen, her lips parted but no words coming out. The pride she had carried just moments before vanished, replaced with shock and shame. Her insult had turned against her, and now she was the one left speechless. Zinal's quiet strength had spoken louder than any cruel word. At the baby shower, Sile's sister Olabisai humiliates her for marrying beneath her. The room was beautifully decorated, filled with colorful balloons, laughter, and joyful music. Guests were enjoying the food and clapping for the mother-to-be, but the celebration turned bitter when Olabisai rose with a proud smile. She looked around the hall before pointing at her sister. With a sharp voice, she mocked Sile, saying she had chosen a poor man for a husband and had lowered herself by marrying beneath her. The crowd went silent, the joy fading as her cruel words spread across the room. Some guests looked uncomfortable, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Sile sat quietly, her hands resting on her belly, her heart heavy with shame, but she did not speak back. Olabisi continued, her voice growing louder with every word. She bragged about how she would never marry someone with so little, making sure everyone knew she felt superior. The room was tense, and the happiness of the gathering felt crushed under her insults. Sile stayed calm, her eyes lowered, but she carried a quiet strength within her. She knew something her sister did not, and the truth was about to change everything. Suddenly, the sound of cars arriving outside drew everyone's attention. The doors opened, and in walked an unexpected guest. It was Sile's husband's wealthy uncle, dressed in fine clothes, his presence commanding respect. Gasps filled the room as he stepped forward with a warm smile. He greeted the guests and then turned to Sile with pride. In front of everyone, he announced a special gift for the unborn child. A large piece of land and a generous amount of money to secure the baby's future. The hall erupted with cheers and applause. Guests clapped loudly, their faces lit with joy, praising Sile and her family. Tears filled Sile's eyes as she realized the depth of love and honor shown to her. Her husband stood proudly by her side, his uncle's words silencing every doubt that had been thrown. Olabisi's face changed instantly. The confidence that had filled her vanished, leaving only shock and shame. She lowered her head, unable to meet the eyes of the guests. The very sister she had tried to humiliate now stood celebrated, surrounded by respect and love. The crowd's cheers drowned out Olabisi's pride, leaving her speechless in her own bitterness. Funmi's sister, Nandi, mocks her at the baby shower for being uneducated. The hall was filled with bright colors, laughter, and the sound of music as friends and family gathered to celebrate. But in the middle of the joy, Nandi stood up with a proud smirk. She raised her voice so everyone could hear, pointing at Funmi with sharp words. She mocked her, saying she had no education, that she would never amount to anything, and that she would always depend on others. The guests fell silent, the celebration dimming under her cruel voice. Some people looked away, while others stared at Funmi with pity. Nandi continued, her words growing harsher. She compared herself to her sister, boasting of her own achievements, and made sure everyone heard her insults. Funmi sat quietly, her hands resting gently on her belly, her face calm but her heart heavy. She had endured these words before, but this day was different. She knew a truth that no one in the room expected, and she waited patiently for the right moment. Just as the tension grew heavier, one of the elders stood up and asked Funmi if she had something she wanted to share. Slowly, Funmi rose to her feet, her eyes shining with quiet confidence. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. The room grew still as she revealed a certificate. In clear letters, it showed she had just graduated with a degree in law. Gasps filled the room as the truth spread quickly. The same woman Nandi had called uneducated was, in fact, a new lawyer. The guests erupted in applause and cheers. People stood up to congratulate her, their eyes filled with admiration. Smiles spread across the room as they celebrated her achievement. Funmi's heart swelled with pride, not just for herself but for the child she carried, who would grow knowing their mother had fought through challenges to succeed. Nandi's face turned pale. The smirk she once wore disappeared, replaced by shame. Her words, once sharp and confident, now made her look foolish in front of everyone. The guests no longer paid attention to her. All their love and respect were now showered on Funmi. Standing tall, Funmi's quiet strength and success spoke louder than her sister's insults, leaving Nandi with nothing but regret. At the baby shower, Larato's sister, Chika, calls her weak and unlucky. The hall was decorated with bright colors, the sound of drums and laughter filled the air, and everyone had gathered to celebrate. But the joy faded when Chika rose with a proud look on her face. She raised her voice so all the guests could hear and mocked her sister. She said Larato had no strength, that she was unlucky in life, and that even her child would face the same fate. The words struck deep, and the room grew quiet. Guests looked at each other with discomfort, unsure how to respond to such cruelty on a day meant for happiness. Chika continued, her tone sharp and bitter. She reminded everyone of Larato's struggles, making it sound as though her sister would never rise above them. Some people lowered their heads, while others stared at Larato with pity. Larato sat still, her hands resting on her belly, her face calm though her heart ached. She did not fight back. She knew her sister's words came from jealousy, and she trusted that truth would find its way. As the tension thickened, the sound of a walking stick tapped against the floor. The town elder slowly stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. The guests immediately grew silent. He placed his hand gently on Lorato's shoulder, and then raised his other hand toward her belly. In a deep, steady voice, he spoke words of blessing over the unborn child. He declared that the baby carried greatness, that the child would inherit leadership and bring honor not only to the family but to the entire community. His words filled the room with gasps spread among the guests, followed by cheers and clapping. People stood to their feet, celebrating Lorato, praising her strength, and honoring the blessing placed upon her child. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she felt the love and support surrounding her. What had begun as a moment of humiliation transformed into a moment of glory. Chica's face turned cold as the crowd celebrated her sister. The bitterness that had fueled her insults now left her standing in shame. No one cheered for her, no one admired her harsh words. All eyes were on Lorato, who now stood tall, wrapped in the honor of the elder's blessing. The jealousy in Chica's heart was exposed, while Lorato's light shone brighter than ever did Ada's sister, Imani, ridicules her for living in a rented house. The baby shower was full of joy, with music, dancing, and laughter filling the decorated hall. Guests were clapping, enjoying food and drinks, and celebrating the coming baby. But suddenly the happiness turned cold when Imani stood up with a proud smirk. She raised her voice and told everyone that Ada was still living in a rented place, that she had nothing of her own, and that she was too dependent on others. The words cut deep, and the room grew tense. Some people looked down, while others whispered quietly, feeling sorry for Ada. Imani's voice grew sharper as she repeated her insult. She spoke as if she was better than her sister, making sure the crowd heard her brag about her own life. The laughter that had filled the hall disappeared, replaced with uneasy silence. Ada sat quietly, her hands resting on her belly, her eyes lowered but her heart steady. She did not answer her sister's cruel words. She trusted her husband and knew something Imani could not even imagine. At that moment, Ada's husband stood up with a calm smile. He asked for everyone's attention, and held up a brown envelope. The guests turned to look at him curiously. Slowly he handed the papers inside to Ada. With trembling hands she opened them, and her eyes widened in shock. They were documents, proof of ownership of a brand new house bought in her name. Gasps filled the room as he explained that he had been preparing this surprise for months, wanting to give his wife and child a permanent home. The hall erupted with cheers and clapping. Guests rushed to congratulate Ada, their faces full of admiration and joy. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she embraced her husband, overwhelmed by his love and the blessing of their new home. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from pity to celebration, as everyone praised her good fortune. Imani stood frozen, her face pale, her pride crumbling before the crowd. The same insult she had used to shame her sister now turned against her. No one paid attention to her anymore. All eyes were on Ada, who now stood tall with happiness and dignity. The celebration grew louder, leaving Imani swallowed in her own shame that Miriam's sister, Anom, mocks her and reveals family secrets at the shower. The baby shower was filled with music, laughter, and smiling faces. Guests clapped, children played, and the air was full of excitement for the new life about to arrive. But the joy broke apart when Anom stood up with a sly smile. She raised her voice and began to throw insults at Miriam. She mocked her in front of everyone, saying she was not worthy. And then she went further, revealing private family matters that were meant to stay hidden. The crowd grew tense, their smiles fading as whispers filled the hall. Miriam's eyes watered, but she sat still, her hands resting on her belly, her face calm though her heart ached. Anom continued, enjoying the silence of the crowd. She spoke louder, making sure everyone heard her ugly words. She believed she had embarrassed her sister beyond repair. Some guests shook their heads in disappointment, while others avoided eye contact, ashamed of hearing such bitterness on a day meant for happiness. Miriam stayed quiet, her strength hidden in her silence, not knowing that something bigger was happening without Anom's knowledge. What Anom did not realize was that the event was being live-streamed to the entire community. Phones and cameras captured every word she spoke, broadcasting her cruelty beyond the hall. People across the neighborhood, watching from their homes, saw the way she mocked her sister and exposed personal matters. The truth was no longer hidden in the room, it had reached everyone. Suddenly, phones began buzzing, and messages of support poured in. Guests inside the hall began receiving calls and texts from people outside, all standing up for Miriam. The mood shifted quickly. Family members and friends surrounded her, offering words of love and encouragement. The crowd clapped loudly, chanting her name, showing her that she was not alone. Miriam's tears turned into a smile, as she felt the warmth of the community lifting her up. Anam's face turned pale as she realized the damage she had caused herself. The same cruelty she thought would shame her sister had now been witnessed by everyone, and it left her standing in disgrace. The people no longer respected her words. Instead, they admired Miriam's calmness and strength. The hall filled with joy again, but this time louder, as Miriam stood surrounded by love while Anam was left in silent regret. At the baby shower, Temi's sister, Layla, says she will always depend on others. The hall was bright with decorations. The sound of drums and laughter filled the air, and guests were happily eating and chatting. But the cheer faded when Layla rose with a smirk on her face. She looked around the room and then turned to her sister with sharp words. She said Temi had no ability to stand on her own, that she would forever rely on people for survival, and that her child would grow up seeing a mother with no strength. The crowd grew silent, and whispers spread among the guests. Some shook their heads in discomfort. Others looked at Temi with pity, while Layla stood proudly, thinking she had won attention. Temi sat still, her hands folded on her lap, her face calm though her heart pounded. She had heard these words before, but this day was different. She carried a secret that she had kept quietly, waiting for the right moment to share. Layla kept speaking, reminding everyone of her own achievements, making herself look stronger while belittling her sister. The joy of the celebration felt buried under her insults, and the atmosphere grew heavy. Just then, one of the elders stood and asked Temi if she wished to say anything in return. Slowly, she rose to her feet with a gentle smile. She looked around the hall, and then announced in a steady voice that she had just accepted a top government job. The crowd gasped in shock. Murmurs spread quickly, and then her words sank in. She explained that after years of studying and working hard, she had finally been appointed to a position of honor and responsibility in the government. Cheers erupted instantly. Guests clapped. Some even stood up to applaud, their faces glowing with admiration. People rushed forward to hug her, praising her for her strength, her dedication, and her success. Temi's eyes filled with tears of joy, not from pain but from pride. The same guests who had pitied her moments before now celebrated her with respect and love. Layla's smile vanished. Her face turned pale, and her eyes dropped to the ground. The words she had spoken so boldly now hung over her, empty and foolish. The crowd no longer listened to her. All attention was on Temi. In that moment, her insult had backfired, and admiration for Temi filled every corner of the room. Hi, friends. Two Hearts, thanks a lot for staying till the end. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe for more amazing stories. See you next time. Waving hand.